Arjun, and welcome to another session of Motivating Monday. As you are aware, we are currently on a series of lessons covering humility, mercy, grace, and service. This week, we'll be covering on the aspect of mercy. Let us first explain what mercy is. For the explanation of mercy, let us look at the Luke chapter 6, verse 36, which tells us what mercy is about. Luke 6, verse 36 reads, "Be ye therefore merciful, as your Father also is merciful." While mercy is typically thought to be kindness or forgiveness that is shown towards a person, particularly a person who has done us wrong, the Bible definition goes much further than this. The Greek word for mercy also means to be compassionate, to exercise compassion and pity towards one another. And as such, for our session today, we'll be looking at the quality of mercy with this definition in mind. Next, let us see how humility is exemplified through a character from the Bible. We will be looking at the parable of the Good Samaritan and see how the Good Samaritan exemplifies the quality of mercy. In the parable of the Good Samaritan that's being described by Jesus, we see in Luke chapter 10, verse 30, that the Good Samaritan extended mercy to the Jew that fell amongst thieves and to the Jew that was left for dead. Instead of abandoning the Jew, just as how the priest and Levite abandoned him, the Good Samaritan instead showed compassion to the Jew, and this is recorded in Luke chapter 10, verse 33 to 35. In this passage, we see that the Good Samaritan bound up the wounds of the injured Jew, poured valuable ointment on his injuries, sacrificed his own comfort in letting his beast of burden carry the injured Jew to the nearest inn to be taken care of. And on top of this, the Good Samaritan also gave money to the innkeeper to fund any additional expenses in nursing the Jew back to health. This is such an exceptional example of mercy, considering the fact that both Jews and Samaritans historically were at odds with one another. In particular, the Samaritans were often racially discriminated against by the Jews, and that the Jews equated a Samaritan as to one having the devil. And this can be seen in John chapter 8, verse 48. This reads, "Then answered the Jews and said unto him, Say we not well that thou art a Samaritan and hast a devil?" From this passage, we can see that there was a lot of discrimination and prejudice against both Jews and Samaritans. And as a result of such discrimination and prejudice, the Good Samaritan never had an obligation to help an injured Jew. And even if he did, he didn't have to go to the extent that he eventually went, sacrificing his time, his comfort, and even his financial resources in bringing the Jew back to health. After all, even the religious authorities in that time, such as the priest and also the Levite, did not stop to help the Jew. Particularly for the priest, the priest, as we read in Luke chapter 6, went so far as to avoid walking past the Jew so that he did not feel compelled to extend his help towards the injured Jew. And as such, compared with the conduct of the priest and also of the Levite, the Good Samaritan exercised deep compassion and mercy to the injured Jew. Seeing how the Good Samaritan exemplified mercy, let us ask ourselves how we can also exercise mercy as we reflect on today's Motivating Monday lesson. How can we cultivate the same merciful and compassionate mindset that the Good Samaritan had? Firstly, we should be tender-hearted towards the needs of others. We should soften our hearts and be ready to empathize with one another. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 8 tells us that we have to be of one mind in order to be compassionate towards one another. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 8 reads, "Finally, be ye all of one mind, having compassion one of another, love as brethren, be pitiful, be courteous." The reason why we have to be of one mind is so that we are able to show empathy towards one another and hence be able to understand the needs of others. This enables us to be compassionate, to be pitiful, or also known as to be merciful, and also to be courteous towards one another, as mentioned in this passage. Secondly, we should also remember that our faith should be an active faith and not one that is merely professed verbally. The Bible reminds us in James chapter 2, verses 4 to 16, that it profits little if we are in a position to help our brethren, but we do not help them. Instead, our faith has to be an active faith that is backed up by works. James chapter 2, verse 17 tells us that a faith that is not active in works is dead. Furthermore, in Galatians chapter 6, verse 8, we read that we are to sow to the Spirit. This tells us that we ought to sow spiritual things. As such, in Galatians chapter 6, verse 10, we have to therefore use all opportunities available to do good to men in order to reap life everlasting. Galatians 6, chapter 10 reads, "And as we have therefore opportunity, let us do good unto all men, especially unto them who are of the household of faith." Thirdly, we should also remember that we have to be merciful to others, simply because God is merciful towards us. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 7, Jesus tells us that whoever is merciful will likewise obtain mercy. As such, being merciful is a trait that every child of God should have. This mirrors the golden rule that was shared by Jesus, whereby we ought to do unto others that which we want others to do unto us. Likewise, in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 32, Apostle Paul also reminds us that we should extend the same forgiving and tender spirit of Christ to our fellow brethren. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 32 reads, "And be ye kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God for Christ's sake hath forgiven you." As we go about the rest of the week, let us be reminded that mercy is about empathy, compassion, and being tender-hearted. Let us learn from the example of the Good Samaritan, who was so moved with compassion that he went above and beyond what was expected of him in assisting a member of society that was discriminatory against him. And finally, let us also apply this lesson on mercy in remembering that we have to be tender-hearted towards the needs of others, that we have to live out an active faith, and that God will show mercy towards us as we are merciful towards others as well.